Hello everybody, this is Tip-Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down 10 custom Magic the Gathering cards created by the community over on Reddit at r/custommagic. Essentially, every so often I do a video where I talk about 10 custom cards and give you my thoughts on the cards, whether they're a really cool idea, or I see problems with the card, or I think something is really underpowered or overpowered, and I kind of just talk about the card similar to what I would do during spoiler season. Now, this is a really fun series, and I have a whole bunch of them, so you should check it out. But if you just want to see some awesome custom cards and really don't care about my commentary, you can find a link in the description to the subreddit where there are just a ton of these things, and they are pretty awesome. So what did I do? I filtered by the top of this month and picked out some of the ones I thought were more interesting to talk about and the ones that were a little bit more serious, as some of the ones on the subreddit are a little bit less serious, which is fine. You know, you can have less serious cards, but it leads to less interesting discussion in my opinion. So let's jump right into this. Starting off, we have Judgement for All. It's a 6-cost white sorcery and it says destroy all creatures. But if blue was spent to cast a spell, it can't be countered. If black was spent to cast it, destroy all planeswalkers. If red was spent to cast it, destroy all artifacts. And if green was spent to cast it, destroy all enchantments. Okay, so there are some very interesting things here. First off, at its base, this is just a 6-cost destroy all creatures. Not the best, but it has some other utility here. I mean, you can put this in a blue and white deck, and boom, now it's an uncounterable uncounterable board wipe, which is very powerful because a lot of decks are going to play a lot of creatures and then use board wipes or counter spells to try and protect them. The black gives you access to all planeswalkers, destroying them, and then artifacts in red and enchantments in green. Now, if I were to have some issues with the spell, first off, a little bit of the wording's a little weird. For instance, the blue one says cast this spell, and then the rest of them say if black was spent to cast it. Now, what I do like is the fact that how it's structured, you can pay like 4 in white if that's all you have, or you can pay like 2 blue white, or you can pay like black blue white, and then you get 3 effects. On top of that, one issue I do have is that blue making it so it can't be countered is a little off color. Normally that goes to red, but I think that for this card it would be completely fine because it's not that big of a deal. It's not like it's a core part of the card. I think it's just a very interesting design of, it's a card that isn't necessarily multicolored, but is going to give you a huge bonus for being in multicolored. And so obviously in something like Commander, which is where I judge a lot of custom cards because it is the most casual format. And if you were to, for instance, actually want to play with this, Commander would probably be the only format where you'd get people who would be fine with it. So yeah, I think that in that kind of sense, you need to be in a 5-color deck, which means this thing can be very versatile. It's very similar to Ausier's Command, which can like destroy big creatures, small creatures, enchantments, or artifacts. If you are in a 5-color deck, for instance, you can choose to destroy all creatures, planeswalkers, and artifacts, or all creatures, planeswalkers, and enchantments, or just all creatures if you don't want to destroy those other options. So yeah, I definitely think this is an interesting one. One thing to note is this doesn't say may. So if, for instance, you have to spend 2 black, like you have 6 mana and 2 of it is, swamps, you have to destroy all planeswalkers. So keep that in mind if you were to play this in a custom game. Next, we have Mock Sigil. It's a 0-cost legendary artifact with Exalted, and it says whenever a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and then you can tap and add 1 mana of any color. Activate this ability only if a creature you control attacked this alone this turn. So yeah, it's a Mox. Generally, Moxes are going to tap for mana, and a lot of the modern ones have like limitations. This one is a little bit more extreme. Mostly because it's one of those cards, and I don't like this because of it, and it's not a bad design, it's just, there are some cards that just say, if you're winning, win more, which definitely, there is a value to those cards. You do need to actually, like, win the game. Just being in the winning position doesn't mean you've won the game. But this card, if you are losing, for instance, is not going to do much, because if you can't attack with a creature, this thing doesn't really work. And so because of that, it's just not one of my favorite cards. It's one of those cards where if you're losing, it's kind of just useless to you. So yeah, keep that in mind. Of course, the Exalted part of it is pretty interesting for 0, and honestly, any 0-cost artifact can be considered playable in a lot of different decks. So I'm not saying this is a bad card in any way. It has this mentality of, hey, let's reward you for already being able to attack. Next, we have White Lies. By the way, sorry, before I continue, you can see in the upper left what Reddit user made all of these cards. I did not make any of them, and each of them should have the artist for the art also attributed in the card. So keep that in mind. Either way, White Lies is a 3-cost white instant, and it says until end of turn, if an opponent would draw a card, instead that player gains 3 life. This one is a little bit extreme. I mean, it's not stopping your opponents from drawing cards, which is fine, I guess. It's not normally a white thing to do, but instead you're replacing it with life. I'm not a huge fan of this card, especially because of the cost of it. Yes, it could be really nice, like if you're in white and someone's about to draw like 30 cards, but in blue, for instance, and I know blue is not white, and white lies, it can be kind of a joke on the fact that white doesn't know what card draw is, instead they just gain life. But if you're looking at this from a gameplay perspective, blue has a creature that when it ETBs, stops your opponents from drawing, and instead of them gaining 3 life, you create a treasure token. So it's just a very bad version of that, because this only affects it for a turn. Of course, this can affect the first card each person draws. So, like, I don't know how good this card is, but it definitely seems to be a joke on the idea of, oh, white doesn't do card draw, they do life game, and that's all they do. Next, we have Bipolar Bear. It's a blue or a red and a blue or a red. For a 2/2 creature, Weird Bear. And you can pay blue and it gets +0/+1 until end of turn. Or you can pay red and it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Or you can pay a blue and a red to switch their power and toughness. Now, this does not feel very color, pie, staying within the color pie. Why? Because essentially you can pay X, where X is either blue or a red, and then, sorry, a blue or red and X to kind of just give a creature +1/+0 in blue. So you're kind of giving a creature fire breathing in blue, or in red, giving it a toughness boost. Why? Because you can boost up the red. You can use red mana to boost up the power a ton, so make it a 6/2, and then boom, swap it around, and now it becomes a 2/6. So yeah, very, very powerful card because it does break the color pie. You can play this in a monocolor deck. Mono red can play this card and use it to boost up toughness, which I don't think is as big of a deal as blue being able to use this and essentially have fire breathing. I think in Commander it's fine because you have to be in both colors anyway, but outside of that it does feel very not ignorant of the color pie. I'm trying to think of the word I want to use. It doesn't seem to follow the color pie as closely as I would like, but I don't think it's that powerful where it would be a huge deal. Although fire breathing is a powerful effect, and fire breathing on a 2-drop is also something that could be discussed as being kind of overpowered, especially when you can turn that fire breathing into protection. So yeah, I think this card actually is probably pretty good. Next, we have Unnecessary Side Quest. It's a 4-cost blue sorcery, and it says each creature goes on an adventure, which means you exile them, and their owners may cast them from exile later as if they were an adventure creature. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting way to use kind of the adventure mechanic on its own. I mean, it's not necessarily a mechanic, but yeah, I definitely like the idea of this. I think it could be costed a little bit higher. A 4-cost exile everything and make everyone recast it is kind of crazy. It's almost, I guess it's bouncing all creatures, essentially. You're bouncing all creatures back to their owner's hands, except they're not actually in their owner's hands, which I guess is worse than bouncing it, mostly because if they are in their hands, they can be discarded, they can be above 7 cards, and then have to discard those cards. So I guess this is actually probably better than that, and because of that, I actually think it's fair, and I think it could open up some really interesting potential. Next, we have Particle Accelerator. It's a 3-cost legendary artifact, and it says whenever you cycle a card, if it's the first card you've cycled this turn, gain 3 life. If it's the third card, draw a card. If it's the 5th, untap all non-land permanents you control, and if it's the 7th, you take an extra turn after this one. So yeah, this is a repeatable way to get extra turns by cycling cards. Yes, in order to cycle 7 cards, that would require you to have 7 cards to cycle. Of course, cycling does give you a new card, but it would also require you to probably have 7 mana, so this probably isn't going to happen. But I am sure there is a loop in here where there's a card, and I'm thinking about it right now, I don't remember the name of it, that whenever you discard a card, you can put it on top of your library. So you discard the card for the cycling cost, put it on top of your library, redraw it, and then as long as you have 7 mana, you go infinite. So this thing definitely seems like something that could go infinite. However, it feels like it goes infinite in such a way that it is a very commandery type of thing. It's going to be very gimmicky and janky and, all of that. And so because of that, I think it's fine. However, I think the drawing a card is a bit much. I think if it gained 3 life and then scryed you, maybe, you're already kind of cycling through your deck with cycling, so scrying might be a little bit better and a little bit more fair. And then untapping all non-land permanents you control is really just enabling that 7th extra turn. So I wish it said if it's your 5th, untap all non-land permanents you control that don't have mana abilities. Boom, Still really good, still really fun, but it doesn't let you just instantly get up to that 7th and then take an extra turn, which then can let you do this all over again. So you're kind of, I guess, accelerating over and over and over and over until you win. I think this card is really, really, really powerful, especially for 3. And it also has cycling, which is really amazing because it is a legendary artifact, and it means that you're much more likely to be able to keep cycling things. So yeah, very insane card. Next, we have Gary Manderer. It's a 2-cost black creature demon advisor 2/2, and it says when voting, the player with the fewest creature gets an extra vote. So it's very similar. First off, voting, there's a couple cards that are like, hey, you vote this or this, and, certain things happen. And essentially, by doing this, you can give yourself an extra vote if you have the least amount of creatures. Now, what's interesting is that because Gerrymander is a creature, you will always have at least 1, which means that if any opponent has 0, they will get the extra vote. Now, that can be fine. Some creatures or some voting spells actually kind of punish each person who votes for what they vote for. So it kind of is letting them choose their own punishment, which in doing so, if they get an extra vote, well, now they have to vote twice, which means they're getting twice the punishment. So I think there are a lot of really interesting things you can do. You could make it so it hurts your opponent. You can make sure that you always have this ability. And it kind of just brought up the topic of me wanting more voting cards. I think they're really awesome, and I hope we see more of them in the future. Next, we have Frolicking Field Hound. It's a 2-cost white creature dog, 2/1 with flash, and whenever an opponent searches their library, you may return it to its owner's hand. If you do, search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So the idea here is it is mono white ramp that is kind of restrictive. You're going to have to pay 2 mana, but you can do it in response to someone searching their library, and you're kind of a rampant growthing for specifically a plains card, and you can repeatedly do this. And because of the flash, it's really good. Even the fact that it returns it to your hand is a downside, but it can also be an upside that has some interesting implications. Now, you might be asking, how often is someone going to be searching their library? Well, in lower powered, I don't know how often that'll happen, but in a more high-powered game where they have things like fetch lands and evolving wilds and fabled passages, remember, that triggers this as well. So I would say this is actually a pretty good card, and it feels very balanced for white in terms of ramping. Next, we have a Tag, and this one's kind of an interesting one, and it feels very commandery. It's red for an instant, and it says, tag target opponent. They become it. As long as a player is it, creatures they control have haste and are goaded. Whenever a creature it controls deals combat damage to a player, the defending player becomes it. So the idea is that you are kind of tagging someone, and then as soon as a creature they control deals combat damage to another player, the player they tag becomes it. So it's almost the inverse of Monarch. Monarch is you get this thing, and if someone hits you, they become the Monarch. This is the opposite. And so it's this kind of thing that you're kind of wanting to give it away, and you're kind of forced to give it away because your creatures are goaded, meaning they have to attack. And so you can kind of tag people, use the spell, and I think tag is actually a really interesting thing. I think it could be done a little bit better by using something similar to the Monarch, where it is a physical token instead of just remembering, oh, you're it. But yeah, I think that this is really interesting. And then we have Orchestra Lumbermill. It's a land and enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap and add red, and then sacrifice a forest to untap it. So basically, you can tap all your mana. So let's say you have 7 lands, 2 of them are mountains, 1 of them is this, and 4 of them are forest. You can tap it for 7, and then you can sacrifice your 4 forests to get 11 mana. And that is pretty crazy, but now you're down 4 lands. So it's kind of this, oh, here goes your last ditch effort, or, here's the turn you're going to win. And if you don't win, if it gets counterspelled, you just set yourself back a ton. And I think that kind of gameplay isn't really super fun to play against, but I think, or even to play it sometimes, but I think it can be really interesting, and I like the design of it. Alrighty guys, that is going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, like I talked about a little bit earlier, I believe at the very beginning of the video, I do have a whole playlist full of custom Magic stuff, so if you like to see more content like this, check that out. And I post it every Sunday, so hit that subscribe button to stay notified. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.